Record. Oh, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Jordan Backstrom. I'm with the National Community Stabilization Trust. Thank you all for joining us on today's Community Impact Briefing. Today's presentation is going to be on catalyzing affordable housing development using a faith-based development approach. We're going to be joined by David Bowers from Enterprise Community Partners. We'll follow that up with a policy briefing from Emmy McClintock on NCST's policy team. Before we get into all of that, I'll cover some of the housekeeping items here. Today's CIB call, like all of our CIB calls, will be recorded, and the slides from today will also be available after the call. So those will be hosted on our website at ncst.org. I also want to copy the link to our YouTube channel, and I'll put that in the chat here. If you have not checked out our YouTube channel lately, I would encourage you to go check it out. We semi-recently reorganized that, and all of our CIB call recordings are hosted there, as well as other webinars and presentations that we've hosted at NCST. So please feel free to check that out. And again, today's webinar will be posted there shortly. We'll also have time for questions after David's presentation. Y'all can feel free to type those questions out in the chat feature. You'll also see the Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to type those out as we go. If there's anything that we can answer in real time, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll kind of save those up for that Q&A feature at the end there. Additionally, later in the call, we'll be able to use the raise hand feature. I can unmute you. You can ask your question to David as we go. Without further ado, we'll get into it here. I'm really excited to introduce David Bowers, our guest speaker for today's Community Impact Briefing. David is Vice President and Market Leader for the Mid-Atlantic and Senior Advisor for Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative with Enterprise Community Partners. David, you said you didn't want a long intro, so with that, maybe I'll just kick it over to you. But thank you so much for joining us today, and really excited to hear your presentation. So.
Jordan, thanks so much. Very much appreciate it. We'll get started here. I'm going to share my screen, pull up a presentation for everybody. It's a real honor to be asked to be here today. Let's see. All right. Jordan, just want to confirm you can see screen over there?
Looks great.
Great. All right. Well, let me start my timer. So again, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Again, thanks to Jordan and the team at NCST, Raquel and others for inviting me here today. So we're going to talk about our faith-based development initiative. I'm going to take about 25 minutes to go through that set of slides to help ground us, and then we'll, as Jordan said, move into Q&A. So just a brief overview: Enterprise, national nonprofit organization. Our mission is to make home and community, as you see, places of pride, power, and belonging. We support community development organizations. Really, I like saying simple speak, we're an organization focused on making life better for folks, with housing really as the foundation of that. We operate across 3 divisions: a capital division, where we bring together a range of different capital products to support affordable housing developers, a solutions division where we do programmatic and policy work, and an owner-operator division that has 13,000 affordable homes that we operate in the Mid-Atlantic region. You'll see since 1982, we've invested over $80 billion, supporting over 1 million homes across the country. Our strategic priorities really focus on increasing housing supply, expanding and supporting racial equity in the ecosystem, and supporting resilience, both of the built environment and of residents who live in those communities, with a nod towards upward economic mobility. So this conversation that really today that ties into supply is really timely for us. And again, appreciate NCST for the invitation. So to dive into it, our faith-based development initiative, we are moving close into our 20th year. We started in 2006, really is with a recognition that in our industry, we need to do more to not only preserve existing affordable housing that serves low and moderate income folks, but also expand the supply. So you'll see that our goal here is to work with houses of worship to expand the supply of housing, support equitable procurement opportunities, strengthen the neighborhood anchor institutions, these houses of worship. And we talk about building an enterprise program while nurturing a national movement that includes but is much larger than enterprise. When we talk about, one of the key kind of sub-bullets here is really how can we work with houses of worship who have undeveloped or underutilized land and help them make an informed go, no-go decision about development, And then if they decide to do development, help them move forward. Like the flag for this, what we call radical common sense. Even though many of us obviously are in this industry, it's a good reminder that we've got 20% of renters around the country that pay more than half of their income for housing. We've got over 600,000 people in our country that are homeless on any given day, 13 million folks in a food desert, half of Americans live in an affordable childcare desert. So there's plenty of need around the country. This notion of the potential, though, that you have these mission aligned entities, houses of worship, who own a large amount of real estate. This one data point from 2019, where the Urban Institute looked at 800 vacant parcels just in a few jurisdictions around Washington, D.C., and estimated anywhere from 43,000 to 109,000 new housing units could be built on that land. That's just 800 parcels in a couple of jurisdictions. I like to say to people, you've got houses of worship, whether it's red state, blue state, purple state, suburban, urban, or rural. You really have houses of worship in most communities across the country that exist oftentimes, many of them, in a sea of need. And many of those mission-oriented entities are also struggling themselves. Not all, but many of them are. So it is this notion of radical common sense of potentially marrying need with institutions who could potentially, when worked with properly, meet that need. So our approach, we have been iterating this approach over these last nearly 20 years. And where we are now at Enterprise with our faith-based development initiative, or sometimes you'll hear me call it FBDI, is really believing strongly in the need for a multi-year cohort approach that helps build the capacity of houses of worship to be good partners in this work. So what do? We raise dollars to pay for cohorts that offer these elements. Training. There's a 20-hour curriculum that we'll get more into that helps really, that we require the senior clergy and lay leader, at least one lay leader, to participate in this training, over this 20 hours of training, that really aims to make them comfortably conversant. We're not trying to make clergy and lay leaders professional developers and experts, but at least comfortably conversant and knowing the process and the players. We also raise money to pay for grants that cover some of the very early pre-development expenses, particularly a market study and feasibility analysis, again, with an eye towards helping the house of worship make an informed go, no-go decision. We couple that with raising dollars that will pay for a development consultant who serves essentially as an owner's rep, who can help in those early stages to translate the results of the market study feasibility analysis, help that congregation with the go, no-go decision thinking. And then also, if the house of worship decides to move forward, help run some numbers, kind of pro formas, basic numbers, help put together a project concept plan. That's a key milestone after the go, no-go decision, a project concept plan that then becomes the basis of selecting an established developer, which is then another milestone, kind of putting an RFP out for a developer, choosing a developer, and then moving along in the process. You'll see also some of the TA includes what we call shepherding TA from the enterprise staff. So whether it's enterprise or any other backboning entity, that's a key element. The checking in with the clergy, checking in with the lay leadership, just to make sure they're doing okay. We have an organizational assessment, so a house of worship can really get a sense of where they are. Do they actually own the land? Do they have an internal team that can work on this project? Have they done this kind of work before? So a real in-depth assessment of kind of where they are as it relates to readiness. We have added a clergy coaching component now, where we are bringing together clergy who have completed projects to be a resource, a kind of a listening ear for the senior clergy one-on-one as they go through the early stages of this process. You'll see down on the right-hand corner, this what we call peer learning exchange. So again, the training has the senior clergy and lay leader. The peer learning, the iron sharpens iron, is just senior clergy one-on-one, sharing about their experiences one with another. It's very stressful, can put a lot of pressure on clergy leaders who are navigating through this process. And so we create that kind of safe space for them to share with another. And this access to experts. We've literally had grant dollars available at times, and we've had clergy say, hey, look, I don't know where to shop for a developer, right? So really kind of putting together information about various experts and vendors in the ecosystem, we have found to be extremely helpful on this. So when we think about the steps of development, we talk about the 7 steps. You'll notice there's also what we call this discernment process, step 0, which is at the very early stages. We have found that a number of houses of worship are actually not even quite ready for the real estate training piece. They really need to go through discernment process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. This just gives folks here a sense of what are some of the topics that are covered, right, in the module, in the 5 modules on the development process. So again, not designed to make folks experts, but comfortably conversant. I tell people I'm a proud graduate of Howard University School of Divinity. Old Testament, New Testament, systematic theology. I always say I didn't take Greek, Greek took me. Also took a class literally learning how to counsel people who are dying. What I did not get in seminary was training on how to negotiate a land disposition deal or agreement, how to run a real estate pro forma, things that you wouldn't expect typically for folks to get in a seminary, but that can be helpful to understand the basics of when moving through this process of thinking about developing land. So these are the topics that we cover through the curriculum. To give people a sense now of where we are, how this movement has grown, both the enterprise program, but also the movement. So we're currently operating cohorts in 8 states, 13 jurisdictions around the country, ranging from the Charlotte, North Carolina is just getting started, now to Washington, D.C., where we've had cohorts that have been operating now for several years. So we're excited about that expansion. We also have what we call an online guide, which is really a resource directory online. People can access it and get information on a range of different topics, case studies, templates on different types of forms that might be used and the like. So there's a resource there. One thing I'll also say about these cohorts is that's interesting. We've had various local jurisdictions take varying approaches to how they support. In some cases, in a place like South Florida and Miami, local governments have actually given land to houses of worship in their neighborhoods to do some work. We've had places like Washington, D.C., Montgomery County, Prince George's County, who have actually invested local dollars to support cohorts. And same thing with Charlotte, North Carolina. And we've been excited about private philanthropy, all coming from local foundations as well as bank philanthropy to support this. So there are varying ways that we've seen public-private support for this work. What we've been able to accomplish so far, policy wins, really important to flag that we are seeing more and more at the state and local level, laws being passed to support doing things like allowing for by right development by houses of worship, in some cases streamlining approvals. We've seen in some cases, as I mentioned, the support through dollars appropriated for cohorts or the disposition of land. So there have been varying approaches. You may have heard of a movement called Yes in God's Backyard has been a term coined for some legislation in places like California. There's been federal legislation introduced by former Senator Sherrod Brown and now by current Senator from Virginia, Warner, to think about how to provide support for this effort. So the movement continues to grow locally, nationally. We've been excited about what we've got so far, the 9,000 plus homes that are in the pipeline. We've got a MOU with the Church of God in Christ, national denomination, and so we're excited about that, and that work continues. This just gives you a sense of some of the growing visibility, again, not only for enterprise, but also just the movement, literally international, right? The Economist, to the business journals, Washington Post, New York Times. So we are seeing more and more coverage. I've said to people that, we've been at this almost 20 years. Really clear to point out, look, houses of worship have been doing development for generations, right? Long before this effort came along. What is fairly unique, we think about the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative, has been this notion of a national housing organization really working intentionally to bring a comprehensive set of resources to the table to engage the faith community as solution partners and thinking about them as integral partners in this work. So we're excited. There are. I never forget a conversation with someone at a bank who said, "We can't even say faith-based." That was about 10 years ago. About 4 or 5 years later, they were actually providing grant support for faith-based development initiatives. We're seeing more of this work being supported around the country. So we're excited about the growing movement. So what's next? We want to build this movement. We're really focused a lot on trying to encourage local jurisdictions to do more jurisdictional level cohorts. We're having more conversations with other denominations to think about things either nationally or at the regional level. Just came from the National Baptist Convention USA, their national convening, and having conversations, a presentation there about this. So looking at denominational level potential, more policy wins, again, at the state and local level. Another example, we're just in a meeting yesterday with the District of Columbia, their housing department, doing office hours for folks in our cohorts. That's another element we're starting to add, where the development teams and the local clergy can go in and have an appointment with the housing officials or policy and land use, planning and land use officials. And so the district government on their last RFP for their trust fund dollars, for example, has put in points for faith-based development projects. So there are, again, varying ways to look at support from state and local governments. Number 5 is really a key point, this notion of getting the FBDI approach built into the code, as we like to say, of how denominations, government, philanthropy, and development thinks about how houses of worship can utilize their land to meet local community needs. If anyone was thinking about doing affordable housing development, and let me be clear, all housing is affordable. The question is to whom. So we're really saying focus on kind of below 80% or below 80 to 120, so low and moderate income. If you're thinking about doing housing that supports those income levels, if you're thinking about doing kind of community development, right, bringing amenities to communities, folks obviously are going to think of the government has to be involved, developers have to be involved, the finance community has to be involved. We want people to start thinking about the faith community should at least be engaged. We're not suggesting that every house of worship should be doing development. That is not the case, but many of them could, and because of just the vast numbers of them, that land being brought to bear could be extremely impactful. And we want to expand the capacity that we have and others in the industry to respond to this potential. So let me spend now a few minutes talking about some key lessons learned and some of the key questions that we ask folks, and then I'll end with a few images of projects done. The unfamiliarity with the development process can oftentimes lead to no action or hasty action by houses of worship. So it really is important to build the capacity of houses of worship. We have said to them many times, houses of worship are seen as, unfortunately, easy marks, where unscrupulous developers will be looking to take advantage of them. And so we have to make sure they are prepared and equipped with a team to help them make thoughtful decisions and that their interests are being looked out for. We have to help developers and the faith community understand their timelines are different, right? I tell people the frame of reference for developers is quarterly. The frame of reference for the faith community is eternity. So oftentimes what we need to do is slow down the developers and speed up the faith community, help them meet somewhere in the middle. We are clear now that it can easily take several years for a house of worship to get from that starting point of taking training to getting to the point of selecting a development partner. So now we try to frame our cohorts as a 3-year piece. Sometimes it's sooner, sometimes it can take longer, but easily we're finding 2 to 3 years of that kind of the training capacity building to help them get to that point. Which leads to the next bullet. The connection to intellectual capital is so critical. And so to help make the go, no-go decisions. I talked about the office hours today, fostering conversations with developers and other development consultants who can help along the way. So that intellectual capital team building is really critical. At times, mistrust and lack of appreciation by both the house of worship and developers of what the value add that the other brings to the table can lead to things getting gummed up. So we really try to help on both sides, folks understand what each is bringing to the table, all sides being clear up front, what's in it for me. We talk about, if there are developers on the line or others, competence and integrity are critical. Competence and integrity are critical for the faith community when they think about the partners they put together. And we talk about here how clergy, sharing with clergy the importance of them casting vision, gaining buy-in from the membership, but also delegating day-to-day management to folks who are more accessible to the day-to-day partners. So the next few slides are a couple of key questions that we encourage houses of worship to think about as they're going through the process. Have they done their step 0 discerning work? We alluded to this earlier. You know, for some houses of worship, they really are at a point where they need to think about what is God calling them to be at this current and next stage of their life as a body of worship. Are they willing to answer that call? What does the community need that they exist in? Many houses of worship are commuter institutions, right? People drive in, they drive out. So they may not actually know what life is like in the immediate community or what the needs are. And what legacy does that house of worship want to leave for the next generation? Again, you'll oftentimes have conversations with houses of worship who have been in existence for 50, 100, 150 years, not unusual. So that notion of legacy and what is left for the next generation, both the house of worship and the community in which it lives. Do they actually have site control of the land to develop their vision? And do they want to maintain control or ownership over the long term? What are their long and short term economic goals? Are they expecting cash flow over time? Are they willing to subsidize the project or break even? We tell people there's not a right or wrong answer there, but the house of worship needs to know what its answer is so its interests are protected as they negotiate through. Are they willing to contribute any portion of the land value to the transaction to help, for example, maybe with deeper income targeting, depending on the population they want to serve? What type of housing or community facility do they want to develop? Who's their target market? What kind of impact do they want to have? Does the house of worship have economic empowerment interests or racial equity goals? Do they want to create jobs for community members, for example, or support minority-owned businesses? We always say, look, if you got a $40 or $50 million total development cost project, that's 40 or 50 million dollars that'll be moving through various vendors in your community, you know, from the legal costs, contracting costs, title company, right, et cetera. There are a lot of folks who make money on these projects, and so the question is, who do they want to have access to opportunity to bid on some of that work? Will the house of worship have an active role in the development? Do they have a separate entity for development? Is there a main point of contact? Are they prepared to manage an asset? Do they have a real estate attorney that's just on their side of the table? These are some of the questions, and I actually want to go back to one of the questions, mindful that for NCST and, for example, for groups that think about particularly home ownership opportunities, we have had many houses of worship want to do rental. They want to maintain ownership or control of their land over the long term. Many kind of lean towards rental. But increasingly, we are seeing more houses of worship who are thinking about home ownership because they want to be an instrument of helping to build wealth in their communities and for community members. So that notion of if that's important to them, thinking about what does that mean? What does that look like? Making sure they have a land use lawyer, real estate attorney who can negotiate, right? Thinking through what that means, particularly if they want to maintain ownership of the land over the long term, or are they willing to sell part of their land? So that's why some of these it's important for houses of worship to think through these kind of questions. The next couple of slides are just examples. You'll see this in the deck that'll get emailed to you. As Jordan mentioned at the beginning, we have things like case studies on various projects that look at some of the different buckets around organizational readiness. How do you engage community? How do you get approvals, marketing, and lease up? This is just another slide on the same project. Gives you a sense of the project timeline. At the bottom, you'll see 3 years for discernment, right? Pre-development, 4 years. You all know who are involved in development, how challenging it can be. Another one that just really breaks down like the capital stack and who some of the different players were in the project. This is an example of a type of slide in our resource guide, the online directory that I talked about that gets into things like joint ventures. Again, most of these houses of worship are going to need to partner with a developer, maybe a nonprofit who has capacity, maybe a mission-oriented for-profit, but helping them think through. So it's a lot of resources that are in the online guide. I'm going to wrap up in the next 2 minutes or so here with just giving you some examples of some of the types of projects that have been completed so far. This is an example of a project in DC. Interesting here, of the 173 units, 50 of these units are 2 and 3 bedroom units that provide affordable housing for grandparents who are raising their grandchildren. Found to be a need here. There's actually a project in Baltimore that's looking at the same model now. This is actually in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. So one of the most expensive neighborhoods and one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country is providing, you know, 107, this house of worship, 173 affordable housing opportunities for low and moderate income households. This was just kind of straight ahead senior housing built on a parking lot, that kind of extra parking lot space that a house of worship had in DC. This one is an interesting one. Israel Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. They had this 3-story building. They used Unity Healthcare as their anchor tenant. Unity was able to expand and upgrade their healthcare offerings in that community. And the top floor of this building provides a banquet hall and meeting space. Good source of revenue for the nonprofit associated with the house of worship. Also provides a real benefit to community for affordable meeting space, right, in that community, as opposed to having to go to a hotel where costs can be much higher. So that's literally built on just part of the parking lot at the church. And then around the corner, they bought a little slice of land and built a 47 unit senior housing development right across from a metro subway station in Washington, D.C., and a new kind of street level mall that was built, mixed use development. And so really providing seniors access, in a in an amenity rich neighborhood. So real fascinating kind of twofold approach that Israel took. This is an interesting one, a house of worship that actually initially wanted to do home ownership. The Great Recession hit, they got jammed, ended up having to do rental, but they did 49 affordable rental homes up top, ground floor retail space. There's a locally owned pharmacy and a daycare that provides affordable daycare options that are on the ground floor. So a great mixed use project here. And this house of worship is actually looking at a phase 2. This slide we include just because I always remind people, like, focus on the people. At the end of the day, are we in the building business or the people business? If you're in the people business, you got to keep in mind these kinds of testimonials that will help folks persevere even when times get tough, and times will get tough on these projects for all kinds of reasons that many of you on the line probably know. This is an interesting project. A coalition of houses of worship actually put together some money. Land. This building was acquired, provided initially housing for formerly incarcerated men, now serves 14 formerly homeless families. The church, that's one of the anchors for this coalition group, owns essentially most of the rest of the block and is looking at now a whole block redevelopment strategy. They're part of one of our cohorts, and interestingly was one of our initial co-conveners of the FBDI. So we're excited about this project, which will essentially be a campus of sorts, if you would. One of our very early projects in the Eckington neighborhood, really, of DC, right near Eckington, one of the fastest gentrifying neighborhoods at one point in the country. 178 units, 50 reserved for extremely low income households. So again, this juxtaposition of the ability to build this level of affordable housing where there is so much need on land that was totally underutilized for generations, really. Owned by the Catholic Church in a parish that was right there down the street. This is an interesting, fascinating story. It's gotten a lot of coverage around the country. Around Arlington Presbyterian Church in Virginia was literally looking to close. And the case study slides I had earlier looked at this project, but they were looking at closing. They went through a process, kind of hit a wall, decided to go into a deep period of prayer and reflection. We tell houses of worship, don't forget about the power of prayer. Don't take for granted the gifts you bring to the table. So they went through a process. The presbytery, it's a connectional denomination, ended up deciding to sell the land to a nonprofit developer. And so when they did that, they sold the land to a nonprofit developer. The church ended up deciding to stay constituted. They have space now on the ground floor that they worship out of and have meetings and the like in. There's also a workforce development center that's located on the ground floor, and then you have the affordable housing up top. And the last project I'll just mention as I close is Macedonia. Great story here where church, again, just a little parcel of land they owned across the street. They built these 36 units, 5 reserved for physically, mentally disabled. Great story here where the pastor said one day he was leaving church, was really tired. Dr. Leonard Hamlin tells a great story about how he was leaving the church one day after service and was tired and just wanted to get home. And somebody was yelling, "Pastor, pastor." And he said he just wanted to kind of move on. But somebody, "Pastor, pastor." And he said he looked over and there was a woman kind of at the balcony, and she leaned, kind of yelled out to him, "Thank you for my home." And we really think that captures the essence of this work, right? Again, it's at the end of the day about people and providing opportunities that helps make life better for people. So with that, I will stop there. And Jordan, I will turn it back to you. I think we've got time for questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. That was great presentation. Really exciting things to think about there. We say a lot in the current housing supply crisis, like, you need all hands on deck. You need all hands on deck to get involved. And great to see those examples of the faith-based community and houses of worship using their unique characteristics, right? Their assets, their unique characteristics to step up and get some different projects on there. We do indeed have time for questions now. So again, feel free to use that chat feature or the Q&A down below. Also, if folks would prefer, they can raise their hand. I can unmute you and we can kind of answer those real time. So we do have a handful of questions coming in right off the bat. First question for you, David, from Dwayne is, have any of those developments been done that you're aware of using a community land trust model, right? Where the faith-based organization might hang on to the title of the land or the 99-year ground lease for those buyers. Any examples or anything that comes to mind
Yeah.
from those?
It's a great question. We have not seen in the projects that have been completed yet, actual kind of formal community land trust model, but we are seeing more examination of that. Many of the houses of worship are doing a setup where essentially their legal entity that's associated with them that becomes a part of the joint venture partnership will enter into something where essentially there's a long-term agreement with that partnership, and the house of worship itself at the end of the day will have maintains ownership or control of the land, sometimes through a like right of first refusal mechanism and the like. For those that are looking at home ownership, and we're again, I mentioned we're seeing more of those. We have started to see some of the houses of worship who are trying to think about how to do leasing of the land, ground leasing of the land, but then still the ability to provide a home ownership modality, if you would, for buyers. And we have started to see some more who are actually raising the issue of like, is a land trust the way to go potentially? So it's being examined. That's a long answer to say no for the projects that have been completed, but we are seeing more of that being discussed.
Great, thank you. I saw a question come in the chat. Do you partner with any particular denominations in particular, right?
We do. So we do have an MOU with the Church of God in Christ. COGIC is often referred to. So the Church of God in Christ actually has a plan to train, provide resources over time to 200. Their goal is 200 of their congregations around the country. So we actually have provided some support to COGIC. One, they actually hired us to train some trainers who will use our curriculum to train folks. We've trained some trainers in COGIC who will then train the houses of worship. They are looking at doing a model of like regional cohorts over time, where they will train some of their folks and also provide some of the model that we've described that they're tweaking in their own way, but essentially providing resources for the cohorts again around covering some of the pre-development expenses, helping them along the journey. So we were able to provide some grant support to their CDC to help them think through and model that, and did the training for their trainers. So we're excited about that model with COGIC as it's thinking through it. So that's the one formal partnership we have now. I did mention just having come from last week, the National Baptist Convention USA. We had conversations with them, and those will continue. I will say we are participating in some regional level work with denominations in a different kind of way. So for example, in the DC metro area, the Baltimore Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church has a committee that is looking at issues around what to do with land and their footprint. So one of our team members is on that working group. We participated, the Catholic Diocese of Baltimore had a committee of folks that were helping them as they were thinking through their examination of their 61 parishes that they were looking at. So I participated in that. So we are looking to continue flushing those things out. One of the questions, Jordan, I see also that Justin asked, who asked about the denominations, about Mark Elsden and the folks at Rooted Good. And so I'll use that to segue into, if I can, into a piece around the step zero. So the early discernment piece that I had mentioned, which is an important piece. Again, not every house of worship needs that, but there are a good chunk who can benefit from that work. So what we're seeing now is there are more groups are emerging in that space in what I call a professionalized way. One of them is a group called Rooted Good. A gentleman named Mark Elsden, former pastor of a church, has written some books on this issue. Rooted Good has something called a Good Futures Accelerator. We have a partnership with them where it's essentially a kit in a box where a congregation can order that box, and in a self-directed way, it provides a range of resources kind of in the box and online to help them walk through that process. There's a group called Oikos Institute, Reverend Dr. Sidney Williams, that has a kind of different approach, but kind of a similar end game, but theirs is more of a hands-on, longer-term approach. So we are having conversations and doing some work with various groups who are doing kind of that step zero early discernment work.
Very good. We've got questions coming in. So there's a handful of kind of specific geographic questions coming in. FBDI cohorts in Kentucky, St. Louis, but maybe a general question is, how can folks located outside those existing states that you mentioned, David, how can they get involved in the program? what kinds of opportunities are available for people of faith who are also not members of clergy?
Yeah, great question. So a few ways I get at that. One is, and again, you'll see it when folks get the deck emailed to them. Encourage folks to look at the go on to the Faith-Based Development Guide, that website, that piece on Enterprise's website that has a range of different types of resources that people can access free of charge. Some of them are enterprise specific resources. Others are links to things like from different housing finance agencies and others. So that's a resource to go to. I would also say that if folks are in a space where there isn't an enterprise office, excuse me, but you have interest, people can also feel free. I would encourage folks to have conversations with your local jurisdictions, either whether it's in a congregational context or the local government about, hey, have you thought about supporting this? And again, there are models. We're doing this. We're not the only group in this space that's doing this kind of work. So there's work going on around the country. So would encourage if people have an interest in this, talk to local elected officials, local housing officials about this, also local faith leaders to say there's real need, there's real potential, and there are models now around the country of how this work can be done and the like. And so think of that as probably an approach. And we are continuing to look at, again, how we might actually serve jurisdictions where we don't have a local market office that can do all the backboning, because that's a key element, like identifying the local group, a group that has local presence, I should say, whether they're local or national, a group that has local presence who can do the backboning work, and then raising the funding to do the work and engage with faith community over time. And I'll say to Candace, go ahead, Jordan. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's there. Kind of on that similar vein, does Enterprise maintain a database of faith-based organizations who are ready and eager to capitalize on their assets, and do any sort of facilitation of matching them with experienced developers?
Yeah, so yes and no. How about that for a nice DC answer, right?
Yeah.
So what we don't keep is like a national database of here are all the houses of worship per se. What we do have is in each of our markets that are doing cohorts, they are absolutely working with houses of worship. And what we do when that on that page, that slide that showed where we have cohorts going on, our local offices are creating essentially, as I think I mentioned, a bullpen, right? So they are acquiring names of local developers who have, I mentioned, the competence, the integrity, who have a willingness to work with houses of worship, because that it is a different thing. And we've had an instance where developers said, hey, I love the opportunity, but I don't have the patience to deal with a bunch of trustee and deacon meetings, right? So thanks, but no thanks. So there is the sense of like a cultural competency. And when I say cultural, I mean around faith community, regardless of what the faith is or, ethnic backgrounds, just in the faith community. There's kind of a way, there are ways of operating and moving. And so developers need to have competency there. So our folks, will gather information about developers and kind of have them on a local and regional list, so that as faith community starts shopping around for their development partners, we can connect them to them. We also engage faith community also in ways sometimes as guest speakers. Sometimes we'll have representatives of different developers who will maybe coming in for one of the workshops that we do. So houses of worship can hear directly from developers about what their perspective is on things.
Oh, we've got a raised hand from Christopher Jackson. Chris, I think you're unmuted, but maybe.
And while Chris, if you're coming off mute, I'll just say there is a cohort. Someone asked about Carolina. That's just getting started in Charlotte, North Carolina. The city of Charlotte's put money into backing a cohort. As a matter of fact, today I think is the deadline at 5 p.m. for churches that want to sign up for the training and then get in kind of plugged in the cohort. But that's what's going on right now from our end in terms of North Carolina.
Maybe some issues with Chris getting unmuted. We'll move on. Archie, I see your hand is raised as well. If you're able to unmute and ask that question.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Archie.
Yes, I'm in Atlanta. How you doing, David?
I'm doing wonderful, Archie. Thank you. Hope you're well.
Yes, I'm doing great. I have a church that's in Atlanta, but it's in College Park. And we had tried to look at trying to do some development with the church regarding housing. There's one similar to it that's in College Park that's we're in College Park as well, that's over by the College Park train station that they utilize some of the church-made housing. So our church, since COVID, have um, minimized, so there's, low membership, and we looked at trying to do some development with the church. The church is paid off. It's a Baptist church. We looked at the Southern Baptist, seeing what they could do. But looking at what they did with that church over in College Park would be something similar that this church probably could do with the structure of the church and the way it is designed. It had, two different wings on it, two different sanctuary. But right now the church is kind of deteriorating. So I'm like, before it just really deteriorate, what can be done that will offer, and this is over off of 285 in Washington Road, where that community, is steady growing. Um,
Yeah, Archie, I would encourage, thanks for that question. Encourage you, if you would, to, if you go to enterprisecommunity.org,
mhm.
enterprisecommunity.org, and go to where we work, it's easy enough to find. We have a Southeast office that is based in Atlanta. We actually have a cohort that's been operating in Atlanta, and there's some congregations that are being served who are outside the cohort. The gentleman's name is Tim Block. So if you contact our Southeast office, which is based in Atlanta, their contact information is real easy to find on there, and just get connected to Tim Block. He leads our faith-based development efforts for the Southeast office and in Atlanta in particular, and it's based in Atlanta, so you can reach out to him and hopefully can be a resource for you.
Oh, well, yes, I actually know him because he worked with us on a project. I am one of the past presidents for the Empire Board here, so he worked on us with the faith-based initiative with some of the churches. So I will do that, but thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, excellent. David, one other question that came in. How many of these projects have incorporated renewable energy sources, namely solar, battery storage units, to kind of build that resiliency into those units? Any that you're aware of?
So a couple of ways to get at that. So any of the projects that are in DC, because of policy work that had been done earlier, just around affordable housing in general. So for example, all affordable housing projects built in DC for the last over decade plus have had to meet enterprises, green communities, or some similar equivalent standard. So any affordable housing project built in DC, and a number of the projects you saw were DC projects, have met like that green standard. We talk about in our curriculum, there's actually a module that talks about green building and development. So we teach about that in our piece. Of the 100, and we've got about 19 or 20 projects that have been completed so far. You saw that we've got about 140 plus that are in this kind of pipeline of projects being worked with. So we're teaching folks about it, and teaching and talking to the houses of worship about it, their development partners, and they're picking, we're making them aware of it. And then again, depending on what the local government requirements are and qualified action plans, or to get local housing trust fund dollars, for example, there are varying requirements, or building codes, right? The code has been built in green in some places. So what's interesting also is a hook that we have seen some houses of worship who've gotten local dollars to bring like solar panels onto the church itself to help them with like reducing costs, operating costs for the church building, the congregation building. So for some houses of worship, that's actually been an initial hook into the green building world and made them kind of open to exploring that more in their affordable housing or mixed use development.
Very good. And then I think we've got time for one more question before we move on to our policy briefing. If folks have additional questions that aren't addressed today, feel free to put those in the chat or in the Q&A. We can follow up by email on those. But thank you all so much for the questions. This one's a little bit longer one, but as a nonprofit community development corporation, we frequently engage with churches that own underutilized land and are exploring affordable housing as a way to generate long-term revenue. While the interest is strong, many lack that pre-development capital necessary to conduct, even the basic feasibility studies or site assessments, which kind of stalls out those projects in some cases. From our vantage point, we've often stepped in to front the early stage costs, covering a technical analysis, et cetera, to keep these projects alive. But as demand grows, we're grappling with whether this model is sustainable. Should we continue absorbing these upfront costs on behalf of faith-based partners, or is there a more equitable structure that ensures shared investment and accountability from the outset? So pretty detailed question, David, but I'm curious if you have thoughts right
Yeah.
off the bat.
Great question. So I'm thinking that that's a developer, right? A development entity. What I would say is, again, hitting that from a couple of angles. One, if we've known developers, development companies that do that and are willing to take that risk, make that investment. But in terms of getting to like a sustainable level, what we really are encouraging is a couple things. One, it's an investment both from the local government and philanthropic community to help provide, and that's part of our model, raising the dollars to help pay for some of those early pre-development costs. Plus, it allows in some ways for the congregation to bring some level of kind of like equity. We've covered this already. Now it's coming from other sources, but by the time they get to the developer, they can say, hey, we've already put in, invested 50, 100, 150, 200,000 bucks, depending on what they've been able to raise. So encourage conversations with local government and local philanthropy to help put in some of those particularly early pre-development costs that are the most risky to get. So that's one. Two, definitely talking to congregations about what might they have available either at the congregational level or at the denominational level, where there may be in Elsden, Mark Elsden talks about this some in his book about investments by kind of the congregations or denominations to help front some of those dollars to help, again, a house of worship not only make the informed go, no go, but help them come to the table with some skin in the game. And it makes them then be in a better position to negotiate with a development partner about particular potential splits, for example, on development fees and the like, and all. So I do think like if a development company can do it, great. They're willing to do it, great. It helps out for sure. But to get to a larger level of scale and also for them to feel like, hey, we're not taking all the risk here, those are some other things you may want to think about in terms of local conversations.
That's great to hear. Excellent. David, thank you so much. This presentation was great. A lot of really good questions that came in. Clearly a topic that inspires some excitement and some thought. So thank you again. As a reminder, everyone, David's those slides will be hosted on NCST's website. We'll post those later today along with the recording here. So
Thank you,
yeah, thank you again, David. With that, want to transition into our policy briefing. We're joined by Emmy McClintock, NCST's policy manager, and Emmy, really looking forward to just a policy update.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, David, for such a wonderful presentation. I know that I certainly learned a lot, and I think it's very encouraging to see this faith-based approach making such a substantial impact. So thank you again. That was wonderful. As Jordan mentioned, my name is Emmy, and I'm the policy manager here at NCST. I'm happy to share a couple of brief updates that our team is working on and monitoring, starting with none other than the looming government funding deadline. So as some of you might know, lawmakers have until September 30th to fund the government for fiscal year 26. Just yesterday, House Republicans unveiled their legislation, also known as a continuing resolution, to keep the government funded and operating at current levels through November 21st. The House is expected to vote on this measure sometime in the next couple of days, definitely before Friday. And at the same time, Senate Democrats are gearing up to propose their own alternative, one that is expected to be different and carry a little bit more provisions related to healthcare. In addition to congressional activity, the Department of Housing and Urban Development has also recently proposed a rule change to the Fair Housing Disparate Impact Standard, which has the ability to ultimately weaken protections against policies and practices that unintentionally harm households of color. NCST and our Homeownership Alliance are keeping a very close eye on this, and we're really working behind the scenes to understand how these changes, if implemented, could impact access to affordable homeownership opportunities. Shifting gears a little bit and looking ahead towards what is sure to be a very busy fall, NCST is very excited to announce that it will be hosting its third annual Homeownership Policy Symposium. This will take place on November 18th here in Washington, D.C., and there will also be an online option. This year's theme is From Supply to Stability, the Future of Homeownership. This convening will engage different thought leaders, policymakers, practitioners, and different stakeholders around innovative approaches to expand single-family housing and strengthen sustainable homeownership. Throughout the day, experts from across the housing field, national advocacy partners, and local practitioners will be on hand for conversations surrounding affordable housing development, preservation of homeownership amidst the rise of property insurance costs, bipartisan efforts to build and preserve more homes, heirs property solutions, and a lot more. We really encourage you all to join us, whether it's online or in person. Registration will open just in a few days, I believe by the end of this week. So keep your eyes out for that. And again, thank you for such a wonderful presentation and everyone's time today. And Jordan, I'll give it back to you to close us out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emmy. That concludes most of our presentation for today. So I do want to put that YouTube channel in the chat there. So that's NCST's YouTube channel. Again, hosts all of our CIB calls, as well as Emmy mentioned our third annual policy symposium coming up in November. We have recordings from our previous policy symposiums hosted on the YouTube channel as well. So please feel free to check that out. NCST.org also hosts that content. But I want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank David Bowers from Enterprise Community Partners for a great presentation. Really exciting stuff to hear. As a reminder, this is being recorded, will be hosted on the YouTube channel and NCST.org. Any questions in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to anybody at NCST, and really excited to look forward to our next community impact briefing, and more information will be going out on that in the coming weeks. So thank you, everyone. Have a happy Wednesday. Thank you.